我与建筑师有个约会视频纪录片栏目已经上线好几期了。在疫情期间，全球建筑师们都在家工作，面对疫情带来的多方面的影响，栏目组开始云连线国际建筑师们，用视频去记录全球建筑师们当下的状态。今天我们连线北欧设计之国挪威。在整个挪威，想象力惊破天际线的建筑比比皆是。Under 水下餐厅，挪威野生驯鹿中心观察馆。设计师们汲取大自然的灵感，建筑物便从大自然里生长出来。待会儿我们将连线的是挪威建筑事务所 Snøhetta 的主持建筑师 Kjetil 和挪威建筑与设计中心的 CEO DoGA。同时，我们今天也很高兴能邀请到挪威驻上海总领事尹克廷、同济大学城市与规划学院教授、副院长李祥宁老师，和沪上资深文化媒体人令狐磊，同我们一起连线，聊聊疫情下中国与挪威的建筑文化与生活方式。那让我们来先问一下李老师，您就是去理解挪威建筑的特点是什么呢？
我觉得挪威在历史上它不是一个长期非常富裕的一个国家，所以这也为什么，比如说它跟维京人的这个传统，包括它的历史，我觉得它是能够在一种我觉得是比较跟自然结合的比较好，另外是比较节省的这样的一个状况下来造房子，所以其实为什么会用到很多天然的材料，不是那种非常追求非常奢侈的，设施非常完备的这样的一种空间。当然，当代现代或者进入现代社会或者当代建筑，挪威它的建造技术也非常发达，但是始终保持了和传统的一个非常紧密的联系。比如说挪威的因为航海业非常发达，所以它的造船业也非常发达，所以这个挪威的人呢用木头来造船的这个手工艺非常好的。所以今天在建筑里面，你也会看到很多有曲面的建筑啊，还有这种非常复杂的形态，比如在Snøhetta做的那个。看那个野生鹿的那个驯鹿的那个中心里面，你可以看到，用这种非常复杂的微妙的这个曲面的这个形态做在建筑里面的。我觉得这是一个非常重要的一种工艺吧，是挪威所特有的。另外呢，我还觉得挪威的，就像大家都经常会谈到，挪威的建筑其实比较朴实，同时呢也比较有人性化，跟这个景观跟自然结合的比较好。其实我觉得不是以这种高技啊来取悦人们的，而是说跟这种自然的一种结合，让它跟景观的一个结合，就是它的建筑大体量不是很大体量的，我觉得很多是非常小体量的，那么能够和自然环境能够引入自然环境的，我觉得这其实是我们包括我们像中国的传统的山水画里面，中国的文人是非常欣赏的一种状态，就是我们的建筑不要轻轻的触碰地球，但是呢能够和景观和自然有一个非常好的关系，我觉得这都是挪威建筑的一个特点啊。
那您认为我们待会儿要连线的 Snøhetta 他们事务所的特点是在整个的国际上的这个地位是怎么样的
？Snøhetta 的那个早期的作品呢，我觉得也是在现代主义的这个语言里面，但他们的形式创作呢，就是形式的创造呢，是在挪威的事务所里比较有创造性的。那么当然现在变成一个非常大的事务所，其实他们也有好几个合伙人，同时呢也有在纽约、在奥斯陆，还有马上他们也要在香港，也要在中国的其他地方回来开事务所，那他的团队也是非常庞大，所以他现在的那个建筑的风格就呈现出更多元性的一种样态，所以我觉得其实已经是一个非常综合性的一个事务所了。但是我觉得从早期来说，他们有一系列的文化建筑，所以其实贯穿他们的建筑的一个特点的始终的呢，不是某一种形态，就是它的形态是非常多变的，根据不同的类型，比如文化类的建筑啊，或者住宅啊，或者商业的办公啊，我觉得它都会有不同的形式去给予他们。但是我觉得贯穿始终的是他们对于这个人使用空间的这样一种状态和公共空间的这样一种关系，我想他们也会有很多的这种思考呢。这在所有的全球的事务所里面，在这方面我觉得他们还是比较有特点的。
想问一下令狐，你怎么去理解北欧的生活方式的？跟中国有什么不一样？
对，北欧其实还是蛮喜欢的，因为我第一次去欧洲就去沿着芬兰、瑞典、挪威这样走，所以我觉得在我的想象里面，它就像是世界的尽头。就对我来说，尤其是在北疆的这种，就是北疆的尽头。所以在北疆尽头这种语境下面，我们觉得他们的人，他们的状态其实是跟我们的日常中国人喜欢热闹，他们可能喜欢享受一种孤独的生活状态的时候，比如他们对家的这种设计，就不管是丹麦、芬兰、瑞典一直到挪威，他们对灯光的运用，他们对家的氛围的营造，我觉得都是值得我们去思考，值得去我们重视的。尤其在这段疫情期间，每个人都待在家里的时候，其实如果你的家正好是用北欧的设计，你可能会感受到会更深，就是这种家的温馨、家的这种舒适度可能会更好。这样。
那就是您在去北欧旅行，或者是看北欧的、感受北欧的生活方式的时候，对北欧的建筑或者是挪威的建筑有什么感受吗？
对，就是去年有一次机会是去了挪威的北端的一个非常小的一个城市，叫特伦姆索，然后他们是所谓的北极川的入口，就是大部分人是经过那里再去到北极川的很多探险的活动都是从那里开始。然后我们有一个行走是去一个他们家应该是1870几年就用比较就是他官方拥有，就是他们私人拥有的那个岛，所以他们持续在那个岛上面进行放牧，进行很有限的人类活动，所以我们几乎能看到那个岛跟他们18多少年的时候经营的时候还是几乎是一样的。然后极小的几栋房子，他们也不加建很多房子，是用极简的方式在运作。然后气候也很恶劣，其实常年都是冰雪的，但是他们坚持住在那个岛上面，经历了好几代人都在里面。然后我们又看到很多新的移民，就喜欢这种北欧生活方式或者这种北极川的生活状态的人，他会用自发的形式去建造木屋，然后每个房子是用颜色来区分，这种我觉得都是特别好。就比如他们好像是对医疗建筑是有一个固定的用的颜色的，就是在冰雪
Snøhetta 好像也做过医疗建筑，
就是在冰雪环境下，只要你去到任何的小村庄，如果你看到某个颜色它就代表了医疗的设备，就你有问题就去那个有颜色的房子。所以我觉得都是在一个极端气候里面形成的这种生活方式，它都是像李老师说的这种非常节制的，非常对自己非常克己的这种生活状态，我觉得是不管是挪威人还是我们认为的北欧人文化，它带来的这种生活方式的不一样，跟中国可能有一些儒家思想可能是对应的，但中国进入近代以后，我们很多时候我们对生活其实要的更多，或者对地球要的更多，对整个环境要的更多的时候，包括我们的人居面积，我们可能要很多，但是在很多北欧人看来，或者很多北欧设计看来，它其实走在我们另外一个方向。对，
不，其实很多社会都有这样的一种诉求，就是其实它从一种节俭的一个社会向这个富足的一个社会过渡的时候，人们如何对待财富，这个不仅反映在建造里面，也反映在生活方式里面。比如说日本的料理，它曾经在历史上日本有非常艰难的时期，所以日本的这个人经常会提倡一种对食物也好，对他们的生活方式也好，非常节省的一种方式。比如说你可以看到日本人的这个他们传统的这个食物是非常简单的，可能就是米啊，然后有一点蔬菜，有一点鱼片啊，这样的都是非常简单，不像中国的这个料理里面有各种要讲究色香味啊，非常复杂的烹饪的方式。对，但是进入了那个富足的社会以来，比如说现在大家经常会吃怀石料理，就会觉得是非常丰盛的，有点像中国的会有那种满汉全席的那种关系。我觉得这个其实也反映了 对财富的一种态度吧。但是挪威其实你可以看到它在传统的这些建筑里面，其实它的装饰是非常少的，相比于你像法国或者甚至哪怕德国或英国，它的传统的建筑里面那个装饰都是非常富足的。但是挪威更多的，你看它的那些教堂，当然一方面是因为北方的这个天气，因为它的挪威呢下雪非常厉害，所以它的屋顶呢都不会是这样很平的。如果是这样很平的，它那个都受不了雪的那个压力，房子会垮掉，所以都是比较尖的，因为让雪的荷载可以很快的下去。那么另外一方面，跟它的用木头的这个传统也是非常接近的，所以它都是很多的那个老的教堂都是用木条包裹的，所以我觉得这都是非常天然的一种材料，这些还持续到今天。所以其实在挪威的很多现代建筑里面，你还可以看到很多现代的教堂里面也是用全木头包裹的。
然后我还关注他们其实比如挪威它其实是一个石油资源很丰富的国家，在北海上它有大量的石油资源，然后它的油价也可以非常低，但是挪威政府或者挪威人他非常愿意去选择新能源汽车，这也是一种
节能
选择。这种选择其实有时候其实可以带来你另外的思考，就是人可以在做出某一种选择之下，他可以通过国家通过人的这种对某新事物的一些追求，他可以快速去施展一些策略上的一些选择。然后包括建筑也是这样，我觉得包括他做那个水底餐厅那个建筑物，就是他可以把那个他不需要嘛，对吧？但是他为了营造这样的一个，我认为是一个绝景的体验，就是你必须要到那个地方，然后你选择了一个在水底用餐的体验，能让你感受到就是可能是一个为末日景观或者末日的这种生活体验会是怎么样的，然后你在那里用的餐你会永远记住这一餐。所以他们这种有时候故意把自己置身于一个绝境中的一个状态，我觉得是蛮有意思的。
而且我觉得跟他们的天气和气候也有很大的关系。刚刚讲非常冷，所以他其实北欧人，这个不是，尤其是挪威人称自己是冰雪之子嘛，所以他们是在冬奥会的这些竞技项目上是非常强悍的，那个表现也非常好。所以那个我看到他们有一个每个国家都有那种相当于自己国家形象的一些电视的宣传片，其中有一个广告片就是讲这个挪威人。就是有一个片子，妈妈生的那个孩子，那个孩子一生下来就脚上就套着那个滑雪板的，就是他一生下来就是天生的，就是要会这些冰雪运动的。所以我觉得在寒冷的天气里，我觉得也用朴素的方法来做一些食物，比如说他们的酒，比如他们很有名的叫 aquavit，是用这个土豆做的酒。就是但是那个酒精度很高，是很烈的酒，但是用土豆做的，所以在冬天的时候，他们尤其你进入了那个天寒地冻，像我们上次去挪威就是在冬天1月份，那个雪呢就是穿过那个平原的雪就是2米厚，所以呢其实那个大巴开在那个平原上是它前面的铲雪车挖出来一个像隧道像一个沟一样的，那个大巴就是在里面开的，所以在那样的一个气候里面，你进到这个室内去喝一小杯那个很烈的那个土豆酒，我觉得那是一种让你很暖和的一种体验。这个和我们东北啊那种尤其东北更北的地方，我觉得那种体验是很接近的。那在那样的一个状态下，你不会去想到。人想到的更多的是怎么生存和环境，既要斗争又要共处，但是不会去想着我要花更多的钱在装饰上，这是一个在他们考虑之外的一个问题。对。
OK， 那听完了2位嘉宾对挪威的一些分享，那现在就让我们来连线挪威 Snøhetta 建筑师事务所和挪威建筑与设计中心 DoGA， 让我们连线吧。Okay, let's begin. First, I want to introduce our Chinese guest. I'm Julia from Shanghai, from iTalk media platforms and host. This is Professor Li from Tongji University. And this is Ling Hulei, who is a very senior media expert in Shanghai. Because we are under the coronavirus, so we talk about the relationship between China and Norway, the architecture and lifestyle.
Well, for the moment, we are getting more and more back to normal, as I understand you are also doing in Shanghai. But it's been quite extraordinary weeks and months, so to speak. This isolation issue is very close to the Norwegian soul, so I don't think we really have had a big issue with it. We've just been quite happy to be on our own and avoid any kind of social contact with others. So this is the way we're born, really. But right now, no, it feels much better for the moment. We have 40 people in the office right now at the same time. Not everybody can be there at the same time yet, so we'll start dealing with that after summer. But also we were quite prepared for this. We have been working on social media, on different video platforms for quite some few years, simply because a lot of our projects are spread around the world and it's been impossible to travel everywhere. So we were quite well prepared. And our office in Hong Kong especially has kept open throughout the whole Corona crisis. And I think the reason for that is that Hong Kong, they have these kind of episodes every second year, so they are really well prepared. They know what to do, and especially the Paris office has had to close down, a complete lockdown during this period, which has led to a little more difficult situation. Some few projects have stopped, but then again, a lot of new projects have come in this period also. So it's been totally strange, very unpredictable period.
I can possibly supplement a little bit, Kjetil, because we're opening up slowly, and like you say, it's probably a part of our culture to be isolated. That's true, but that has changed as well, I guess. So, but in terms of Norwegian architects, the unemployment rate right now is more than 10%. So it has increased. So I guess the longer the shutdown is continuing, the worse the number is going to get. But in Norway, like many other countries, the government has launched several financial packages, but in less degree than possibly other industries. This has had an effect for architects, the governmental packages, financial packages, which is a shame. But I guess what's interesting with these financial packages as well, which is affecting architecture and architects, is also the discussion about these governmental financial packages, how they should contribute to the green shift and kind of nudge businesses to shift from business as usual to a more sustainable business model, which I think is interesting. And also in the public debate, which is also interesting in this setting, to kind of bring to the table, I guess, or to the discussion is also some of the post-COVID architecture discussions in the Norwegian media. Some touch upon the effects upon the city, and that we should rethink the concept of cities altogether and live more dispersed and work from home, etc. To me, that kind of discussion is kind of a blast from the past, but they seem to forget all the reasons why cities came to life about 9,000 years ago. So we're not going to quit cities just yet, but that's kind of a discussion. And some argue that the high-rise that's a risky business when it comes to the next pandemic, and that we should kind of ban all suggestions for new high-rise buildings. And some, argue that the modern way of working with open office landscape and free seating and so on is a thing of the past as well. So there's a lot of interesting kind of, I guess the most important discussion is centered around the importance of public space, which is I find super interesting right now. But that's kind of I guess the situation in Norway right now, which is I find interesting to take part in, but also observe from the sideline in a way.
I think for architects, we are back to almost 100% to normal life, except that for some cities that traveling outside is not a normal thing. So you need to, for example, architects in my university who are working in the institute owned by the university, they need to submit a proposal and ask for permission to go outside Shanghai. But the traffic among different cities we think there's still a kind of risk of getting the pandemic to spread, and so there's still some worry, and people are thinking that maybe soon we are coming back 100% to everyday life. Now I think the restaurants are crowded. You go to restaurant and bar, and they are crowded, and you need to wait in line to seats. So to get seats. So I think it's a good sign. But at the same time, the government I think they are not quite sure about the next stage. Maybe the pandemic, the virus will exist for many years or maybe forever. But how to deal with that becomes another question for not only architects but also the everyday life for everyone. I'm also a professor teaching the university, so students are not back to the campus yet. So we are getting used to the internet courses, and we are doing reviews for students' design studio on the internet. So we are using Zoom and WeChat and all kinds of software and application to have this kind of courses. The student cannot make models. They are not making physical models because they are staying at home. They cannot use the machine, laser cutter, all those things in the school. But we are getting used to this kind of thing. So we think maybe even when the pandemic is over, maybe students and professors are used to this kind of long distance far education system. Maybe face-to-face instruction may not be that possible as we thought before. So we are also organizing international joint workshops on the internet with international universities like IUAF from Venice. And because of Venice Biennale was postponed, and we are looking at doing some maybe joint design studio to talk about what's the future city model submerging because of this virus and the pandemic, and also what's the new issues for healthcare. In some respect, maybe we think that we are separated, but at the same time, because we are getting more used to the internet and also to the far distance communication, maybe we'll feel maybe we are getting even closer these days through those different tools and different way of manipulation of communication.
To me, I think I'm not a party guy, so I enjoy my stay at home. It's very good for me to think about, to write something. Because we are also operating a bookstore in Shanghai and the other city like Canton, but we need people to join our we need a speak. We need people to come in and enjoy our different events. But now everything to us is stopped now, so we need to restart to thinking about how we can do in this totally different social distance time. But to Chinese people, I think they are more like the online life, and online they can make a different change to do everything in the normal life. So I think it will change fast. But I think it's like professionally to talk about we need different new ways to link up together. So I think in media we can do this.
from DoGA's side, we're trying to facilitate the collaboration, between Norwegian architects and abroad. But we see that the collaboration between Norway and China is not as extensive as it could be. But we've been discussing this before, me and Kjetil. But we also hope, from DoGA's perspective, that this kind of attitude that Norway is safe and sound, and that the Norwegian architects can kind of take the leap and work more internationally. So hopefully that's going to change. But Kjetil, you could probably fill in a little bit about why we should work internationally and why China in particular is interesting.
In many ways, I think especially China talks for itself. I mean, it's a huge continent of things where people are extremely curious about what is happening around the world. They find in China with the projects that we're doing, which is quite a considerable amount for the moment, after we won the Performing Arts Center in Xingtai, the library in Beijing. We're now working on a new competition for an opera house in Shenzhen. We did the Polestar factory. We're building a high-rise in Hong Kong. So for the moment, our activities are to a large extent diverted towards Asia. And there is something about the attitude. There is a certain freshness. And that, of course, also triggers our incredible curiosity on how cultures operate. I mean, for Snøhetta's sake, this has been a way of getting knowledge since the very beginning, since we started working on the Library of Alexandria in Egypt in '89. In my mind, global exchange is about knowledge. Global exchange is about looking at the mountain from different sides. Global work for an architect is an exchange situation rather than a business situation. It's an exchange of thoughts, ideas, insights, wisdom, and of course also the development of industries and technologies that actually can benefit humankind in the future. So I would, and I've been trying to encourage also other Norwegian practices to do more outside of Norway and especially in China, simply because I think, as you mentioned, we can learn something, and then we can exchange knowledge by also maybe giving some few things back to the places where we're working. We have to stop looking at the globe as one. The globe is one, with all the challenges that we have. When we talk about environmental issues and the climate, it doesn't help to look at country by country. You have to look at it globally, otherwise there is absolutely no solution. So all these things come together in a more globalized thing, and I know today, after the COVID crisis, is not the most popular thing to do is to talk about globalization, but we have to make sure that all the difficulties that are ahead are also dealt with in a way globally. They are global issues, global problems. Does not mean you're choosing the simplest way forward. It might be the hardest. Giving architecture something back. If you always go for the simplest route in architecture, you'll get simple architecture. And I think it's the challenges that we're meeting, the cultural differences, the different people, the discussions that we're having, the sort of drainage that architecture has to go through, and design as well, is what gives it, in the end, its value. If it comes too easy, it becomes easy. And in a way, for us, this working in China has been a tremendously beautiful experience, also with the local design institute like Ekadi or others that we have worked with. And when we see the attitude from certain client types, user groups, involvements, we feel that we're meeting the Chinese market and the Chinese people that we're in contact with on a very, let's say, day-to-day basis level. It doesn't feel different from many other places in the world, but it feels more, let's say, specific. It feels more devoted to some extent. And our experience so far is great, and that's also why we started opening an office in Hong Kong. Probably we're going to continue to look for a location, either in Shanghai or in Beijing. And we want to be there where things are ongoing. We want to be the frontliners of Norwegian architecture where things are happening. And we want to continue doing these things. And we want the exchange to happen simply because exchange is life necessary. And if we don't acknowledge the facts in architecture that are so important to do great architecture.
Can I just supplement a little bit, Kjetil? Because we have had some work, ongoing work at DoGA with the new business models as well. We included you in the work as well. So, but new business models in the building industry, but also for architects. Some of the solutions that we're working with now is what you're touching upon. We're not, we can't work isolated. Okay, we're isolated, but we can't work isolated. And this sense of collectiveness is something that can also be exploited in terms of design, in a design way. So part of the solution that we're working on, or not solution, but suggestions that we're working on, is a new type of design as well, and the design process where you can share in a different way and work collectively in a different way to work on kind of, let's say models, but also methods that can be shared, but also physical design that can be shared. This is a test. The pandemic is a test where we see that it's possible. What I think is probably one of the more important things about the pandemic is that it's we see that it's possible. But I think it's impossible for collective design as well. So I think we'll see some changes also in the architectural practice in the future and in the near future as well, where we have to work together in a different way than we used to.
Although everybody comes from a background of a culture, different maybe, but also I think architecture and design are the common language to link all of us, and we understand each other, although we are speaking different oral language, but at the same time. So we belong to one nation, and we have our own nationality, but at the same time we all belong to the globe, which is shared by everyone.
You're doing perfect. I'm very impressed. You say it in a very charming way. It's beautiful. Now I think the Opera House is moving forward, and it's very close to a lot of the things that we are discussing right now. How do we exchange the art of opera, ballet? How do we talk back and forth between the countries? What kind of experiences can you push forward? What kind of experiences do you need to hold back? And at the same time, we're increasing the sort of public area and the public space that you have in this particular location. So we're sort of doubling up the site area, right? On one hand, you're building on the ground, and there you have all the opera functions. And again, similar to the Opera House in Oslo, we're adding this big fan that you can actually walk on top. And by doing that, we're doubling up the size of the site. So we're really focused on public space. And public space is giving us the opportunity to move outside. So the modern man and woman is spending approximately 90% of their lives indoor. And we know that being indoor is increasing the risk for a pandemic kind of explosion. Being outdoor actually does help you in preventing a spread. So if we could just reduce this indoor time from 90 to say 85%, then we might be in a situation where we actually also contribute to a better situation in relationship to spreading viruses. So we're pretty concerned about this fact that area in itself and density that doesn't, have any CO2 production line or where the consumption level is lower should be provided in cities in order to get a higher degree of public accessible areas. Out of these 90%, by the way, which might be a fun fact, is that approximately 14% of these 90% we're spending indoor, we're spending in a toilet. So architecture is really kind of influencing us all the time, and that's why we need to get out of the houses and into nature, into outdoor spaces. So these buildings, including the Opera House in Shanghai, is trying to show that you can construct an outdoor world which is not a plaza, which is not a street, which is not a park, but it's a third kind of space or fourth kind of space where you can start increasing accessibility for the city public. I really also disagree with the fact in blaming cities when it comes to the spread of a virus. I think that's the wrong attitude. But at the same time, we have to make really sure that the future development of cities does include public space, and especially outdoor public space. And we still need to build new buildings. We should just make sure that their footprints are respective and have a certain amount of respect to the areas available in these cities in order not to push density into situations where you don't want it. Density per se is not necessarily a good tool to measure activities in a city, but it might be a good tool to measure individual CO2 consumption or footprint. So the Shanghai has its foundation stone laid. It's moving according to schedule. The schematic design is approved. We're getting paid. We have a great contact with our clients, with possible user groups. It feels like a very, very smooth ride for the moment. We have a mix of people sitting in Oslo and in Hong Kong, working on the project and moving now into the next phase. So I think, it's following a success line for the moment. Very different, and I shouldn't be saying this online, I suspect, but very different from our Busan Opera House, which got stopped, started for years. So this is an exemplary process, I think, with the Shanghai Opera House. It's been working really well, and we can't wait to see it start coming out of the ground. It's this position as an architect is simply to love to see things happen. I mean, it's also great to design them and draw them, but the real heartbreaking issue of architecture is to see it being built. And that's when all the emotions come out and you see this most incredible, beautiful wall that has been built during a day by people on site. That really is, that breaks the ice. So yes, we're in a good position. The project is moving forward. We've had some development since the competition on some of the functionalities of the building, but I feel it's a very rational building in many ways. It's focusing on the urban living room aspects of the big lobby, the roof. It's rational and emotional at the same time. And I feel to some extent that we're contributing, coming from the Nordic countries, especially in relationship to outdoors, maybe some sort of Nordic attitude where we're saying, okay, don't be afraid of what a building can do. It's not about its formal aspects. It's about how it operates on an everyday basis and what it contributes to society.
What other types of projects are you receiving from China?
Well, a lot of cultural buildings, I have to admit, like libraries. The library in Beijing, we are just starting again, the main library in Beijing going on. I mean, you might know that we've always believed that the way to truth is through culture. But, you know, an office space can also be cultural. And we're discovering this more and more. And right now we're looking at architecture per se, as you said, as a communal language between architects, clients, to be able to solve local and contextual issues related to climate, related to CO2 production, environmental issues, materials. So I think for the moment, our situation working in Asia especially is just getting better and better by the day. And I think also we're learning so much about how to deal with the situation, how to react. But at the same time, we're not losing the Snøhetta roots, which are based on some of the social aspects of architecture. Personally, I'm not that interested in architecture. I'm interested in what architecture does. I'm interested in what it can do in the future. I'm interested in what kind of changes it can bring forward. What kind of how can it sensitize a public? How can you discover things in yourself that you didn't know you had before you met it? Before you met this particular new building or this particular new park or this particular new design? How can you discover latent elements in yourself through what we as humans create? And that is the future, sensitizing ourselves to become better, also in relationship to each other.
Can I ask a question to you, Kjetil? Because it's we discussed this before, but we share this notion about architecture not being that important or in itself, but the effects of architecture. What can it actually do? Argued also publicly that I see a kind of a glitch right now, that it is possible as a kind of glitch in terms of new direction. And I also argue that there are possibilities now that weren't there before for both architecture and architects. Do you see anything? Do you see the possibilities right now being different than just like half a year ago? Do you see any kind of maneuverable space right now for architecture that you can kind of reposition in a way due to the pandemic, or is it? How do you view this kind of in between and the possibilities for the immediate future?
Well, there are a couple of issues maybe here, but firstly, I'm coming from a position last year where I was traveling 170 days a year. So basically, you have to adapt to the possibilities you have, and you have to understand what they are and what they can contribute to a possible situation also in the future. So what we're learning for the moment is that we can reach situations that you would not have traveled to in any case. So say we're working with a Wikipedia page, and now we can get in touch with the real nerdy user groups and volunteers of the Wikipedia site. Say we can have a conference call with someone sitting up in Siberia, being a specialist in growing potatoes in Siberia. Say, we would never have reached this person before, somehow. So right now, there are certain elements of digitalization that opens connections to places where you did not have the connection before. At the same time, we know when we get back to the office, we need also to maintain the elements of analog relationships that we had before the crisis. So yes, I feel certain things have opened up, certain things have been lost. We have to get back to those things that we shouldn't have lost, and we should adapt and use the things that we have discovered in connecting with each other during the crisis. That said, there is something about how we're communicating, and I am missing the more spontaneous elements of sitting around the table. I am missing the in between, reading between the lines and looking at this kind of body language thing and how you interact and look someone deep in the eye, you know, like really deep in the eye. So I'm missing these things, and I think architecture is, in a way, very physical. It is based on being physical. You know, you have to go to the site, you have to feel the weather, you have to see the rain, you have to watch the sun go up and down, and all these things influence your architectural decisions. It's not enough to have it digitally, because what we are creating is physical. So there is an interrelationship between the physical, let's say, collaborative model that we're having in architecture and design and the result. If the process is only digital, and I believe this, then the result is going to look more like a digital kind of result. So I think we need to be close to life. I think we need to be close to models. We need to be close to the food that we're eating. We need to be close to the water that we're drinking. So it's something in architecture that is simply so deeply embedded in its reality, in its physical representation, that if we move completely into digital processes, we'll lose the understanding of this physical representation. And that's why, you know, for instance, the students, when they can't work in the workshop, they're losing something. Everything can be done on the screen with the computer, 3D models, real time. You can move in, you know, VR. You can do almost anything. Artificial intelligence. It can move forward. We can get smarter. All this, but in the end, it's about where did you fall in love? Where was this space where you fell in love? What was your feeling when you fell in love that day? Was it, you know, in the lobby of a university? Was it, you know, on the way out of the train station? You don't know. So it's all these things that come together in a larger picture to me, which is architecture. So I would never be happy with a digital kind of world only. But there are certain things we are getting in contact with that we didn't have before, and we should utilize that. But I would never give up looking at architecture as a physical kind of activity.
So the hardcore value of architecture itself. Right?
Yeah, every bit and piece, you know, like touching a door handle. It can be so beautiful to touch a door handle and open a door and go from one space into the next. You know, just this thresholding through the door is so physical. The light changes, the color changes, everything is there. So all these things come together. And without that, you can't even call it architecture. Our architecture, and architecture per se, the art of prepositions. Because everything is depending on where your body is located in relationship to the object. Are you on top of, under, in front of, behind? So all these things come together, and all of a sudden you define your own world by being in relationship to the object you're close to.
Well, definitely. I would say the answer is yes, the more social functions or social space. I think it's very interesting what's going on right now, because people, I think, because of the pandemic, they get more aware of their surroundings, because they have to do things in a different way than they used to, only like 1 or 2 months ago. And I think people will probably explore and possibly, let's say, demand something else from architecture than they used to. You know, they change their behavior, the way they move in relation to other people. And I also think that the public space or the social space could play a key role when we're opening up the society again. I just think about how can architecture be a frame or facilitate or even rebuild physical togetherness. I think being very conscious and aware of the kind of the social impact of or effect of public space, I think is very interesting and very important to focus on in time to come now.
So I think maybe people are rethinking the relationship between indoor and outdoor public events. So at the let's say 2 or 3 weeks ago, when people in Shanghai just started to go back to restaurant to eat, I think the first group of restaurants are being crowded are those restaurants who has an outdoor seating area where people were crowded there. People refused to go inside at the very beginning. I think maybe your opera will have the advantage because beside the indoor opera space, you also have for the one you designed for Shanghai with the big steps and maybe an outdoor space for maybe we someday will even see outdoor opera sometime. So I think maybe in the future. In China, people tend to go to have those kind of public activities inside. I think this is very treasurable thing that people are looking for. This is maybe the new format, new model of a public event in the future.
They are cousins, but one is much bigger than the other. So in a way, a lot of the things that we learned from the Opera House in Oslo, we are taking with us into the Shanghai Opera. It could be how you move stage sets around. It could be the movement of actors and players and dancers and singers and musicians. It could be the size of the halls and how the acoustics are working. So a lot of experience from the first one. This one in Shanghai is probably more perfect. A lot of the things that we discovered with the Oslo Opera House are in the Shanghai Opera, but there are some specific differences also. The overall layout has similarities, but of course in Shanghai also there is more focus on education, exhibition. There is more focus on the connection to underground lines and public transportation. It's quite different when it comes to the number of halls. It has one hall which is directly accessible from the outside, so the whole opera house can actually close down. You can get up to the roof and get into one of the big performing areas that also can open towards the outside, which is a very different situation than we have in Oslo. But some of the things are classical and they're just following, of course, what opera houses need to do. But also we have the connection to Chinese opera, and that is kind of the contextualizing, and the interesting thing is that that's more intimate than European opera in a way. It brings the public closer to the actor, and to some extent we also have to open up for this type of functionality. So we'll see how it gets used in the future, what kind of activities it initiates when it's finished. I'm quite curious to see what it does with this particular location. You have the arts quarter happening just around it, you have a big park area, you have the river. You might be in a situation where this building starts, the Shanghai Opera House starts sort of being the ultimate opera house. It's called the Grand Opera. It's breaking with the opera traditions when it comes to being heroic as a piece of architecture, but its functionality will be extraordinarily perfect. At the same time, the operations and accessibility for the public is wide open. It has this big urban living room in the middle where you just gather without having to go to any performances. It's really well connected to public transportation systems. It has a green park area surrounding it. So it's not part of the overall density of the city. It's connected to a cultural hub in the city of Shanghai. It's a further development of cultural aspects. So, yeah, I'm very hopeful, and it is different from the Oslo Opera, because the movement of the roof is definitely a fan. You know, it's when it's too hot, you need a fan. I can just say I find an enormous amount of really talented, great, young and slightly older practices in Norway. But the scale of how they do things and what they do is maybe not so easy to discover. Also, we're not part of the big publications worldwide. We don't have too many magazines. Things are a little less accessible when it comes to what Norwegian architecture is about and how it's being produced. But if you look, you will find gold. So please go ahead and have a look and see what you can find about Norwegian architecture, because there are some really, really beautiful elements being developed these days. We love the poetry of things, you know, because we're speaking two different languages, both Norwegian. So one is the poetic, one is the pragmatic. We love the poetic aspects of what architecture can do and life can do also, and we love the landscapes. So all these things come together in a slightly different way. I can encourage the Chinese public to go and look for some beautiful aspects of Norwegian architecture.